All right.
Shadows of light.
All right, so good evening, everyone. Good evening to those at home. Is there a certain level that I need to speak at, a certain decibel level? Okay, there's no microphone, all right.
No.
Okay, so good evening. My name is Doron-Yitzchak. I practice as a niche or specialist type of coach. And the type of coaching that I deal with is called breakthrough coaching.
What?
Breakthrough. Breakthrough. And breakthrough can only happen when there is a blockage. So I've been doing it for professionally on an international level for about 8 years. And since stepping more into the realm of Chassidut and Pnimiyut Torah and Jewish mysticism, I've been graced to find all of my coaching philosophy in its principal form in the Pnimiyut, in the innards of the Torah, in Kabbalah and in Chassidut. And this has been the propelling force behind my dedication towards being a Chassid, and in my transformation from being sort of irreligious to religious. The transformation first happened on an inner level, and then had to happen on an outer level. And in order for transformation to happen on an outer level, on an inner level, it's sort of easier to change a person's mind. But on an outer level, it's a lot more difficult to transform, because there is this thing called self-image. And my self-image, for many years, while I was transforming on a level of intellect and a level of understanding, my self-image would not let me change the way that I looked until it was time for that to happen. So I'm going to explain a little bit about the practical applications of shadow breakthrough and breakthrough coaching, and what shadow work actually is. And then I'm going to give an introduction to shadow, what shadow is on an esoteric level, on a philosophical level, where we see it in the Torah, where we see it in Kabbalah, and basically how everything comes together in a very, very profound manner. A very profound manner. All right, so on a practical level, a person would come to me if they have some sort of blockage that they cannot get past, or some sort of loop that they find themselves in. Now, this loop can happen essentially in any area, but there are three primary categories where this can happen. And that would be areas of finances or personal income, areas of personal health, so that means like chronic illnesses or bodily functions, and the last one is romance or intimate relationships. Now, I was quite fascinated to find that these three areas have names in the Torah, in Chassidut, and they're called Banai, Chayai, Mezonai. Banai means my sons, and Banai refers to relationships or intimate relationships, because if you don't have an intimate relationship, there aren't going to be any sons or any children. Chayai means my life. It refers to chronic health, because if you have a chronic health issue or a bodily function issue, then it impacts severely on your quality of life. So you could be the happiest person in the world and you could be the wealthiest person in the world, but if you've got chronic back pain, then it's going to impact your life and what you can and cannot do, and the same for any other type of chronic disease or bodily function. And the last one, well, not the last one because there's no specific order, but the last one in the three that I'm talking about would be mezonai, which means my sustenance or my food. And that refers to an income ceiling, right? Commonly known as an income ceiling. Now, everybody knows someone, and you know where you fit in. You know where you fit in. Everybody's got one. You know, everybody knows someone that has an income ceiling. That this person, for the most part, these people with income ceilings, they're capable and they're motivated, but for whatever reason, it just seems unlucky that they just can't make ends meet and they can't get that break. On the other hand, you know someone that does well financially but has terrible health and has always got something wrong on a level of organs or level of back, on the skeletal system, respiratory system, like chronic things, not just the flu or something that passes with time. Chronic means that it doesn't go away, or at least that's the terminology. And then there is the Banai, the intimate relationship. Now, in the Orthodox Jewish world, we don't really see people having girlfriends or boyfriends and then going through girlfriends and boyfriends like we do in the secular world or in the non-Jewish world. But essentially, what happens is that a person can't keep down a relationship, or they can't get into a relationship, and so this unlucky loop continues for many people. It says in the Zohar that Banai Chai Mezonai Lo B'Milta Talia Ela B'Mazal Talia. What that means is that Banai Chai Mezonai, these three areas, Lo B'Milta Talia, that means it's not dependent on a specific set of actions, right? It's not dependent on how hard you try. Lo B'Milta Talia. It's not talui b'davar. It's not dependent on something that you do. What that means is that if you've got a money block, you can try as hard as you want. It's not going. Breakthrough doesn't happen from trying harder. Breakthrough doesn't happen from extra effort. If you have a chronic health issue or a bodily function issue, it doesn't matter how many doctors you go to, because they don't know the solution to the problem. Because the problem is not a physical one. Because if it was a physical one, then it could be treated. And the same thing with the relationship. So it just seems like a whole bunch of unluckiness, okay, which can be really frustrating. So that's basically what the blockages, and what I do for a living is I help people break through these blockages. Now, how do I do this? By delving into a part of the mind, the unconscious mind, called the shadow. Now, the shadow. The shadow is, in terms of the unconscious mind, or a part of the mind that you're not aware of, the term shadow was coined, at least in psychology, because it's been in the Torah long before the person that coined it. It was a guy called Carl Jung. Carl Jung.
The J.
Correct. Jungian psychology, the father of Jungian psychology. Now, the way that psychology has been divided is that you've got Freudian psychology that was brought about by Sigmund Freud, and you've got Jungian psychology, which was brought about by Carl Jung. In the nuttiest of nutshells, Freudian psychology is based on sexual attraction. So from a Torah point of view, you could say that Sigmund Freud was able to really tap into the nefesh behemothit, the animal soul, and his entire psychology is essentially, and I'm really I'm broad brushstroking this whole thing, comes down to the attraction between the two sexes, between the two genders. So he's got something called the Oedipus syndrome, which talks about the attraction between a father and a daughter, and a mother and a son, so on and so forth. And the Western world has adopted Freudian psychology. Again, I'm really putting this into a nutshell and not doing Freudian psychology much justice, because this is not about Freudian psychology. I'm just giving you an idea that there are two streams. The East has, for the most part, adopted Jungian psychology. Okay, now Jungian psychology is very Toradic. It's very parallel to Torah, and it's very parallel to Chassidut. What is the basis of Jungian psychology? He says that whatever's going on in the world, in the universe, is happening inside the human. So that is a pasuk that says, Ha'olam hu Adam gadol, ve'ha'adam hu olam katan, that man is a small world and that the world is a big man, meaning that there are parallels between the world, the macro, the outside, the external, and the man, the inside, the internal. All right, so that is the introduction to shadow work. On a more actual, practical, and actual level, what I help people do is I help people find the use of the voice in the mind that says, I'm not good enough. Everyone's got it. And if you think that you don't have it, then you're stuck in something called denial. Now, this denial is inbuilt. It's part of a design. Because one of the designs that Hashem created this world is a design called photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is when things gravitate towards the light. All right? There are some flowers that you could put them in a kitchen and they'll just grow up as long as there's light. But there's other flowers that need to be outside that if you put them in a kitchen, they will grow towards the window. They will literally grow towards the light. The cactus is one of them. I tried this. I put a cactus inside a kitchen and it literally grew at an angle towards the light. So this is called photosynthesis, and again, photosynthesis means there's a whole lot of other processes that are happening inside the flower, inside the plant. But essentially, we can say that what causes plants and living things to gravitate towards the lights, in plants at least, is photosynthesis. But we see this all the time, that when you turn on a light, it attracts moths and little flying things, and that everything comes to the flame. The same thing is happening inside the human mind. That there is this gravitation towards my own light self-image. And if that means that there's a gravitation towards my own light self-image, conversely, what does that mean? That there is a gravitation away from my darkness. And that gravitation... Yes, I will. So, if I happen to be a stern person, an assertive person, and I know that how I want things in my life, and I know how I want things around me, and let's say I was a little bit, let's call it bossy. So in my own mind, I would see that as being stern, as being disciplined, as perhaps having leadership skills. Okay? But on a certain day, to someone else, I might be a monster. So I would not see myself as a monster. That's my darkness. I would see myself as assertive, as disciplined, as clean, managerial, all of the light things. And I would move away from my own darkness. Okay? Now, I'm going to get into this in later lessons, that the general Eitzah, the general advice that has been given to the masses from rabbis and even Chabad Rabbeim has been continue with this gravitation towards the light. Don't worry about the darkness. Tachshov tov yeh tov. Think good and it'll be good. And I'm going to address this, but in a nutshell, it's because the people don't have the kalim to deal with the darkness. Because if the person went into the darkness, there's actually a lot of pain there. There's a lot of shame. And if a person gets caught up in that shame, and some people do, and they don't have the kalim, they don't have the equipment and the know-how to deal with that darkness, then they're going to get stuck in a very uncomfortable place. So I have the kalim, and that's what I do. So I work in the darkness, but that you could call me a light worker, because I go in there with a torch. I go in there with a torch, and I know exactly what to do with the voice that says that I'm not good enough. And there's many, many, many of these I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy are just like the poster boy and poster girl of the shadow. But there are very, very, very specific ones, because Hashem created the world in duality. Hashem created the world Zeh leumat Zeh. For every bit of light, there is its equal and polar darkness. Right? Hashem is all life and all good. So even He created for Himself a what? Another side. That's what it's called. Sitra Achra. That's called the other side. The other side of good and life. And light is evil and darkness and death. And that's what the Sitra Achra is about. But even that had to be created. Okay? So the general Eitzah has been go with the design. Stick to the good. Do good. Be good. Tachshov tov yeh tov. I don't know what the Yiddish is. I keep on forgetting. But there's something good finds good.
Trach gut sein gut.
That's it. Trach good and find good. Pardon me if I didn't get that right. But basically, that's the Eitzah was keep your mind on good things. Many times the Lubavitcher Rebbe would say, Yasiach et dato, let him think about something else. Don't get stuck there, because if you don't have the kalim, it's just you're entering into a world of pain. The crazy thing is, or the profound thing is, that inside that negative is a lot of power. A lot of power. How do you say negative in Hebrew? Shlili. How do you say treasure in Hebrew? So you can say otzer or otzar, that's good, that's one thing. You could say matmun, which means like it's tamun, it's hidden. But what word is used in Az Yashir? Pharaoh says, Erdof, Asig, Achalek, Shalal. Shalal is the booty. Shalal are the treasures, the riches that get taken. Shalal. So Shalal and Shlili, they're the same word. It's the same shorish, the same root. So inside the negative is a lot of power, and you can see this in a very simple example. If I'm an archer and I want my arrow to go forward, I do not make the arrow go forward. As an archer, my input into the whole system, into the whole delivery system, is not a forward input. It's not an expansive input. It's the polar opposite. As the archer, wanting the arrow to go forward, I make the arrow go backwards. And what gets created in this delivery mechanism called a bow? What gets created? A negative tension. And as long as that negative tension is harnessed, and then there's a point of release, what happens to all of that negative tension? It gets transformed into a positive expansion. In Chassidut, we call the pulling back, because the bow doesn't, and the string doesn't want to go back. It has to be, what's the F word? Forced. It has to be forced. The arrow does not want to go back. It has to be forced. The same thing if I give you a spring and I say, make this work, the spring does not want to contract by itself. It has to be, F word, forced. The same thing is that in shadow work, when we look at the negative, when we look at the I'm not good enough, or whatever the word is, the design is one of photosynthesis. It means that it wants to look at the light. So what am I doing? When I look at my I'm not good enough, what am I doing? I'm forcing myself. The same way that the archer is forcing the arrow back. The same way that the person is forcing the spring to contract. So there's this, it's called in Chassidut an itkafia. A subjugation from the word kfiyah, which means to force. And then what happens after a point of release, once there's enough of an itkafia, once there's enough of a forcing, of a negative tension, what happens after the point of release? The whole negative tension, after the itkafia, there is a transformation. All of that negative gets transformed and converted into a positive expansion. And what do we call this? What comes after an itkafia? Ithapcha, ishapcha, from the word lahafoch. So there is this transformation that happens. And where do these two words, ithapcha and itkafia and ithapcha, where do they fall in Chassidus? We say itkafia chashucha lenohira. That there's an itkafia and an ithapcha from chashucha, which is darkness, lenohira, which is light. And this is exactly what happens in the shadow breakthrough coaching. Not just my one, but also there are other people that do this. You can call it unconventional because there's not too many people. Yeah, like people want to feel good, not bad. So there's a handful of people in the world that do this shadow work. When I say handful, I'm talking about, let's say, in a planet of like 6 billion people, there's maybe like 5,000, I reckon, shadow workers, maybe at most 10,000, maybe. So if you know a shadow worker, you should speak to them. So there's so much more that I want to speak about, but I want to give you the practical application of all of this. So don't have much time, so I'll finish off with this this final piece, at least for the session, about where shadow comes from and why it's so important, why it's so profound. So before there was anything, there was a version of Hashem that was nothing but everything. Yeah, a no thing, but not a nothing. And at some point, this no thing that was everywhere wanted there to be another thing. So in Chassidus we call this that Hashem wanted there to be a mekabel. He wanted there to be a receiver for what? For chesed. So in Tehillim it says, Olam ha-chesed yibaneh, that the world was created for chesed. What that means is that the pnimiut, the internal experience of chesed is ahava, is love, and love is giving. Ahava actually means I will give. Like when the Bible says havli, means give to me. Like when we say hava nagila, let us rejoice. So hav means to give. Ahava means I will give. That's what ahava means. It means give. So the whole world was created in order for there to be a mashpia and a makabel. Someone that's giving love and someone that is receiving love. But in order for there to be a mashpia and a makabel, there have to be more than just one. So what do we call one in esoteric terms? We call one a singularity. So what was the singularity? Well, there's versions and there's stages. At one point it was an Ein, and another part it was an Ein Sof, and another part is an Or Ein Sof. But let's talk about the Or Ein Sof, because that was the part that happened before the Tzimtzum, before the contraction. This Or Ein Sof, this infinite light that was everywhere and had no space for anything else because it was just everywhere. Now we're subject to the law of cause and effect. Our minds are subject to the law of cause and effect. That means that we have to be able to have a beginning and an end in the mind. You cannot fathom, the mind cannot fathom anything infinite. You cannot fathom something that doesn't have a beginning. You cannot fathom something that doesn't have an end, let alone something that has no beginning and no end. All right, so our minds also cannot fathom a light with no ray. A light with no ray. When you think of a light, you think of a light, and then you think of the ray or the glow. But this Or Ein Sof was a light with no glow, a light with no ray. It was all light everywhere. You wanted to ask something?
When you say fathom, is that the same as understand?
Call it what you want. I'm saying get an understanding in your mind, get a picture in your mind, put something in your mind, imagine. By fathom,
you can understand it.
We can understand it, but you cannot imagine it. We can understand it on an intellectual point because we can work with mathematics in mathematical terms, but we cannot imagine. And the truth of the matter is that we actually cannot truly fathom. We can understand it on a limited level. So this Or Ein Sof, this infinite light that has no ray, just this light that was everywhere, it's not the light that we know. So think of the brightest light that you know. It doesn't even come close because this is a light that nothing could stand in its presence. Nothing could be in its presence. So how does shadow come about? No, not a trick question.
Through blockage.
Say it again.
Through blockage.
Through blocking light. So a blockage of light causes shadow.
An
Okay.
object.
Hey?
An object.
Yes, something that blocks light creates shadow. So this is what had to happen on a godly level. In order for there to be a duality, in order to come out of a singularity in a place where there was only one and only God, and nothing else could exist there, God had to obstruct his own light. It says in Likutei Moharan, I forget exactly which Torah it was in, but he was speaking about the light of tzaddikim, and in one of the chapters it says Hashem sam yado va'azay nasa tzel, that Hashem put his hand and created shadow, which would make sense that if there's this infinite light that is so great that nothing else can exist there, would have to be Hashem blocking his own light.
The Alshech also talks about Hashem cloaking, putting a cloak on his light, and the resultant light was a weaker light that was able then to be received.
Right. Or Telka Salma.
Yeah.
The point is that shadow is how we go from a singularity to a duality. And then I'll finish off with this. What is the first world called? The first world in the higher worlds. What is that world called? It's called Atzilut. Atzilut, which means world of emanation or of nobility. What is the shoresh of the word? Atzilut. Tzel, shadow. That's right. So how that fits into the whole exact chain of events, I'm not sure. But it's quite something that the first world, its shoresh is Tzel. I'll take it one step further. We say that man was created in what Elokim? Tzelem, Elokim. What's the shoresh of Tzelem? Tzel. It says that Chava was taken from what part of Adam? From his rib. How'd you say rib? Tzela. What's the shoresh of Tzela? Tzel. And I can go on with these things. Betzalel, that's right. So what this means, and I'll end off with this thoughts because there'll be more to follow, and I hope we'll come back for more. Is that shadow is how we originally went from a singularity into a duality. Okay? And inside the mind, the shadow is the unconscious part and the light is the conscious part. What that means, in order for us to go back to a state of singularity, of consciousness, which means enlightenment or superconscious, right? The consciousness of the neshama, where there is no duality of mind, there is no conscious mind, unconscious mind, because in the conscious mind, unconscious mind model, there is a hitlapshut, there is an enclothement of toda'ah, of consciousness in this enclothement called the identity or the ego or the yeshut. But the neshama has none of that. It's just got this superconscious. It's got this enlightenment, which is where Adam and Chava were before the sin. But I'll get into that into following lessons. What this means is that in order for us to go back, if it was shadow that brought us from a singularity to a duality, that means that in order for us to go from a duality of consciousness, where I've got a conscious mind and an unconscious mind, a shadow, where behaviors of mine are coming out of me that bring me shame and that bring me blockages and bring me suffering, in order for me to come out of that duality of mind, then it's the same process. We need to eliminate the shadow through awareness and enter a singularity of consciousness. And I'll leave it there.
Beautiful. Kol hakavod. Chazak baruch.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Very, very